I need to get a boom like yours, Aaron.
Okay.
So it's to drown out.
Yes, it does.
Yeah. Let me get the comment section up. Great. Let me get the comment section. And as usual, we will just give it 2 minutes.
Oh. Sure.
All right, so we will start in 1 minute at 11:05.
Okay.
We just give people some opportunity to come.
Yes.
Good morning, Lori. Thank you for joining us. All right, so it's 11:05. So we'll start now. Good morning, Aaron, and to all our viewers. Welcome to another episode in the Know Your Rights series. So today we will focus on discrimination during the recruitment process. So on Monday, we published a column in the online newsday, and as a matter of fact, we publish a column every Monday. So you can look out for these columns and share with your friends, family, and colleagues. But in Monday's column, we address this topic, and we want to go into it a bit further. For those who read the column and you have questions coming out of it, please feel free to ask in the comment section. If you missed our column, that's fine. You can still ask questions here as well. And also, we presented on workplace discrimination at the Trade and Investment Convention last week, and we received messages from people who registered for the webinar but missed it. So you can ask your questions here as well for those of you that missed it. So remember, this is an interactive session, so we will answer your questions as we go along, right? So let's just get right into it. Haran, thank you for being here this morning.
Yes, good morning, Shelley. Thanks for inviting me.
You're welcome. It's always a pleasure to have you here. Haran is the Director of Legal Services at the EOC, and he is just the person that you'd want to have access to have your questions answered. Right, so Haran, some people might be looking at the topic for today's session and wondering, how is it possible for the Act to cover a potential employee at the recruitment process without that person even being employed at the organization?
Well, the thinking behind the Act was passed to prohibit certain kinds of discrimination and discriminate in 4 broad categories: employment, education, the provision of goods and services, and the provision of accommodation. Now, today we're focusing on employment, But just to mention, we're looking at these four broad categories, but today the spotlight is on employment. Now, when you think about employment, sometimes the discrimination in employment takes place not so much with how an employer treats with their existing employees, but the discrimination might really take place when they refuse to hire you. So let us take, let's just take a pin. The Act is concerned with discrimination in these four broad categories where someone is discriminated against on a status ground. And every time we speak, I always mention this, refers to certain personal and inherent characteristics. And there's 7 status grounds protected: your race, your religion, your sex, your ethnicity, your disability, your marital status, and your origin. So going back to your question about recruitment, let us say a person refuses to hire you because of your race. That is really where discrimination takes place, because they may not be discriminating against the people who they hire inside of their existing employees. If they say they only want to hire people of a certain race and they will hire people of that race, and the persons who are working there might be treated very well. But if you are of a certain race or certain religion or certain sex, you might find that the hurdles are stacked against you in the recruitment process. So this is why the Act extends to discrimination, not just in terms of how an employer treats with their employees, but how they treat with their prospective employees as well.
Okay, that's very interesting, Haran. And of course, based on what you're saying from the employer's end, this would also have to apply to the advertising stage when the employer puts out a vacancy ad, right? So can you give employers some do's and don'ts, like some tips to ensure that they have inclusive vacancy advertisements?
Well, for example, one exercise we like to do as an internal training exercise is that we would look at the classified ads, and sometimes you would see so many different things in the classified ads. Like there's one that I regularly point out that says a male laborer wanted for a plant shop. Now, we always say that it might be that genuinely the employer in this plant shop, they want a male person because they want somebody, to have certain strength to, lift a big, heavy bag of soil. Or let's say you're selling big, heavy palm plants and bougainvilleas and that sort of thing. You may feel that, yes, you need a male person to tote that heavy load. But the reality is that your employment should be as neutral as possible, because you don't know. There could be a female person who might be able to lift that, do the heavy lifting. And conversely, not all male persons may be able to do that amount of heavy lifting. So what we always say is focus on what the job is for. So if you want to say a laborer needed in a plant shop, 9 out of 10 times the applicants might only be male, but you are not restricting yourself to say only male persons can apply. So you focus on what's the requirement of the job. A laborer needed to lift, heavy. Just think about whatever you have in a plant shop. If you have concrete pots, if you have heavy palms, whatever it might be, you might say you need a laborer, but instead of saying a male employee or a male person, just say laborer needed for a plant shop. And that, because in that way, you open your pool of candidates to anyone out there who can meet the requirements of the job. Going back to the recruitment, what the Equal Opportunity Act is concerned about is that you should not be judged on these inherent characteristics known as your race. You should not be stigmatized or subjected to detrimental treatment based on your ethnicity, your religion, your sex. Again, using the example of a male, we spoke about race, but the example of a male employee in a plant shop, that's detrimental treatment against one entire gender, the female gender. You should be judged based on your merit and ability. So, for example, if you are capable of lifting the concrete pots and the large, fruit trees and plants and bags of soil, then you should be considered for the job, as opposed to saying you're only being considered because of your gender or you're being excluded because of your gender.
Okay. Good morning, Christine. Thank you for joining us. Also remember, please, you can ask your question in the comment section, and as we go along, we'll answer them right away. Haran, anybody who has been paying attention to our Facebook Live sessions so far know that sometimes there are exceptions to the rule, right? So are there any circumstances under which an employer can put out a vacancy ad excluding someone or specifically asking for someone with a particular status? So let's say the ad says the prospective employee has to be a man, or they have to be from a particular location. Is there any circumstances going to be legal under the act?
Well, there are a few exceptions under the Equal Opportunity Act. For example, one is specifically in the case of dramatic or artistic or photographic performances. For example, you might specifically say because you are, let's just say you're filming a movie or a TV show, you need a person of African origin to portray a character, or you need a person of Indian origin. So you could actually say that you're looking for an East Indian actor or an African actor, a male, a female. You have that you have that choice. So if you're doing a dramatic or artistic performance, there is an exception, for example, for employment in a religious shop. That is a shop that caters to, persons of a particular religious background. The employer can say that they want persons from their religious background to work in to work in a religious shop or a shop that caters to that. But I always like to use the example. That's just for employment in a religious shop. If you're hiring someone to say paint the church or to weed the yard, that sort of thing, to do yard work, that is not the same thing. So, the church or the mandir or the mosque will have to now, open their employment to all persons of all religions or all backgrounds. Then there is also an exception for, and there are certain specific exceptions with respect to religion. For example, there's an exception for the ordination of priests and members of a religious order. Again, that religious body has every right to choose who they want to ordain. For example, in the Catholic faith, only men can become priests, women can become nuns. In the Hindu faith, you have to be of the Brahmin caste to be ordained as a pandit. So again, every religious body has complete freedom in who they ordain in their clergy or in their priesthood or as it might be, and also who they hire to work in their shops. But in everything else, there is they have to comply with the Equal Opportunity Act, and there is a specific exception for employment on the grounds of sex, where being of a particular sex is a genuine occupational qualification for the job. For example, and the Act lists a number of examples. One of them is, for example, working where you're working in a dormitory or that sort of environment, where you may say, well, for reasons of privacy, decency, or sanitary considerations, you only want a particular sex. A classic example would be a female dormitory. You may say that you only want a female person to be there. If, for example, that person may have to go into the bathroom areas where persons are changing. Again, we said privacy and decency. You may say only a female person should be working there. So there are certain specific exceptions under the Act. As I said, the dramatic performances, religious considerations, and what is called a bona fide occupational qualifications, bona fide occupational characteristics, BFOC or BFOQ in the case of sex.
Right. Haran, I just want to get into another example because I just want to make sure our viewers understand. So, for instance, if someone was told that a job requires them to be unmarried with no children because of the nature of the business, let's say it's late hours, right? It seems like a good reason, but is this considered discrimination?
Well, yes, because you have to, you can't make that choice for that person. What you can do, however, is make it part of the, you need to make it part of your contract of employment. So this is really where I like to say human resources needs to come in and needs to be involved from early on, in that you need to say that this job is not an 8 to 4 job. It's not a 9 to 5 job. You can be called out at any point in time and you are required to be able to attend call, but you cannot restrict the job in advance to say that you must be unmarried or you must not have children. You need to say that these are the these are the genuine requirements of the job, and you need to be able to attend to these requirements. Because it then gives the person the opportunity to say, well, I need to make alternative arrangements. I need to perhaps, ensure that I have a caregiver on standby, whether it is a parent, or my parent or my spouse needs to be able to attend on standby to if I'm looking after if I have children, I need to be able to make arrangements for them.
Yeah. Thanks, Haran. So basically, it's not making that assumption.
Yes, not making that assumption. Yes.
Right. Okay. So in terms of the process, right? So let's say I see one such advertisement you mentioned earlier about only men want and so on. Could I lodge a complaint against that particular employer? Do I need to apply to be able to lodge a complaint, or could I just lodge a complaint because I see it?
Yes, the Act has to lodge a complaint under the Act, you must have what lawyers refer to as locus standi. That is to say, you must be a person affected. So it's not just, sometimes we get a lot of people calling us, did you see so-and-so in the newspaper? What are you doing about it? Or did you see this report or this social media, event on social media, whatever it might be, a video or what have you? What are you all doing about it? No, we are not empowered to investigate or treat with complaints that we just see in the public domain. It has to be that we can only treat with complaints where someone lodges a complaint, and it must be that that person was a person affected. So let us use the example of the plant shop. It must be that, well, in the case of a plant shop, one might argue that because the ad excludes females, you did not apply. But again, you would have to say that I was interested in a job or I wanted to apply. This can't be that I opened the newspaper and I saw this and I wanted, the classic example, the retired housewife sitting down at home, reading the newspaper. It can't be that. It has to be that you would have been a genuine candidate for the job. Perhaps if you could say that you are, I'm just using an example, that you're a female gymnast or a bodybuilder, so that you know that you could do the job, as opposed to merely saying, well, I saw this on the newspaper. It has to be that you were a genuine candidate, but perhaps you did not apply because of the discriminatory ad. That sort of thing. It must be that you were directly affected.
Yeah. Okay, thanks for clarifying. Good morning, Racine. Thanks for joining us. And once again, you can post your questions in the comment section and we will answer. Well, Aaron mostly will answer these questions for you on the session today. I want to introduce a topic here that is not necessarily part of the recruitment stage, but definitely something I think that we should touch on, right? So let's dive a bit into reasonable accommodation for a second. Could you explain what it is and how do companies and employees know what is reasonable for them?
Yes. Well, reasonable accommodation applies in the case of a person with a disability. You would recall, and just to recap for the benefit of persons who are now tuning in, the Equal Opportunity Act is concerned with discrimination on 7 status grounds. I mentioned race, ethnicity, religion, sex, marital status, origin, and disability. So now what the Act the thinking behind the Act is that when an employer, for example, is treating with an employee, when it comes to these other factors, that is, you say your race, your sex, your religion, the employer should be what is called blind to these things. You should not take these things into account. You should not say, I'm hiring you because of your race, or I'm promoting you because of your sex, or using your example, I'm not going to hire you because you are married with children, that sort of thing. You need to be blind to that. Disability discrimination, however, is different in that the employer has to take cognizance of the person's disability and make what is called reasonable accommodation for that person. Now, first thing to note is that the employee or prospective employee would need to say what their disability is, and they would need to be able to say what is the accommodation that they're looking for. Examples that we've seen, let us say you have diabetes. You can say that what I need is I need a break what the accommodation you need is that every 3 hours or so, I need a break to perhaps take my insulin or take my medication, or any, not just diabetes, but whatever your condition is. If you say that every 3 hours, I need a 10-minute break to take my medication, then that is something you would need to disclose and discuss with your employer. And your employer is actually obligated to make what is called reasonable accommodation for you. That is to say, they must accommodate you if they are obligated to accommodate you, but only if they can show that providing this accommodation would impose on them an undue or unjust burden, then they're not obligated to do it. But just to stick up in reasonable accommodation doesn't necessarily mean that they have to give you some special or differential treatment to all other employees. Because let's use the example of the person who says, I need a 10-minute break every 3 hours, so that during the day I will need 3 10-minute breaks. the employer can say, yes, I can accommodate you, but I give a 1 hour break for lunch. If I give you these 3 10-minute breaks during the day, then I can only give you a half an hour break for the lunch. So it's not a matter of saying that the employer must give you the same 1 hour break for lunch as everybody else, but then on top of that has to also give you these 10-minute breaks. If it is that they don't give it to other employees. Now, if it is, most employers, for example, let's say you're working in a supermarket, they always insist that their cashiers and what have you, persons can take breaks every so often. But let's just take a hypothetical example. There are no breaks. That you're required to work continuously for 4 hours or 5 hours straight. If it is that they give these breaks to everyone else, that's fine. But if it is they don't, and you're requesting that break, then they can tell you, well, if for us to give you that break, perhaps you need to come in a half an hour earlier. You need to give up half an hour of your lunch. You need to work half an hour later. That sort of thing. That's what reasonable accommodation means. It doesn't mean that you get to impose your wishes to give you an advantage over and above the other employees. Reasonable accommodation, although it exists in disability discrimination, it also can extend to other areas of discrimination. Let's say, I always use the example of religious discrimination. Somebody who says that they are practicing Muslim and they would like to have Friday, a period off on Friday afternoon to go to their mosque. The employer can also tell you that, okay, if it is you want from 1 o'clock to 2 o'clock to go, I am willing to adjust your lunch hour from 1 o'clock to 2 o'clock. It is not a case of saying the employer must give you the 12 to 1 lunch hour that they give to everyone else. And on top of that, they must give you this extra time. They can, again, they will need to have this conversation with you. If you're saying that you want this, we can give you this extra time. We can adjust your lunch hour so you can take your lunch hour from 12 to 1. And you can come in earlier, you can work later, that sort of thing. That's what reasonable accommodation means. So in all cases, you would have to look at what it is the employee's disability or condition is, and what sort of accommodation they would require that in order to enable them to perform the job. And the employer would have to give consideration to this to see whether or not it can be accommodated. The employer just can't articulate a blanket position. No, I don't give this to anybody else and I can't give this to you. They have to consider it and perhaps have a discussion with you about how you could be accommodated. If the nature of the job is such that you cannot be accommodated, then so be it. There's always the example of persons who work in the financial services sector abroad. Let's say you are living abroad and you have to, the classic example, you have to wake up at a time when the markets open abroad because you are, a stockbroker, that kind of commodities trader. If your job requires you to be awake at the time, for example, we were recently involved in the Pass the Ball Challenge. It's often said that persons who work in the football sector have to be awake at a time when FIFA's office in Geneva opens. So when it's 8 a.m. in Geneva, we used to hear stories that the former, Mr. Jack Warner used to be awake at 3 a.m. in the morning, but he used to do this simply because he needed to be up at the time that their office is open. So if that's the requirement of your job, that you have to be up at that time, then if that's the inherent requirement of your job, you can't then try to negotiate with the employer because of my medical condition, I need to sleep until 6 a.m. That would not be a reasonable accommodation for the employer. If it is, the employer has to say, well, no, this job, I require you to start at 3 a.m. because we are meeting international deadlines and timelines and that sort of thing.
Right. That's really interesting. I have a question here from in the comment section.
Yes.
This is relating to the plant shop example that you gave.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Right, with the vacancy ad. The person says, what if the person really wasn't interested in the job, but when asked if they were candidate for the job, or I guess, maybe if they were interested in being a candidate for the job, they decide to lie and say that they were interested?
Well, that's always a risk that we take. Part of the person would have to lodge a complaint and we would have to investigate the matter. Now, part of our investigation, we don't only investigate the respondent, but we also investigate the complainant. We'd have to ask you, well, why were you interested in a job? But, the difficulty with that is the person can always say, well, I was interested. And to some extent, I mean, there's nothing that we can do to really disprove that the person is lying. Sometimes a matter like that can only be proven or disproven if it goes to court, where a person can be cross-examined by attorneys, and you go in the witness box and you're cross-examined, and perhaps the judge can make a finding, well, were you really interested in this job or not? But at the same time, what it is a denial of opportunity for that person. But it's just something to think about. That yes, it's difficult to say if you were or were not interested. One of the things that might happen is that apart from that, we would ask, well, even though you saw a male employee needed in a plant job, did you call the persons to find out more? Because it is possible, let's just say you were interested in the job, then you could have taken it upon yourself to call the person and say, look, I am interested in a job. And maybe the employer might say, okay, send in an application, or the employer might voluntarily say, all right, I will change my ad to make it more inclusive. But so these are things sometimes we look at that, if it is you were interested in a job, what steps did you take to further your interest in a job?
Yes, you're welcome. And good morning, Nicholas. Haran, so for persons who are legitimately affected, let's just say, so someone wants to lodge a complaint saying that they've been discriminated during the interview stage, right? So what are some of the markers, or even those who don't know if they were discriminated, but they have a feeling maybe they would have been, because maybe they would have had the same qualifications, but for some reason they were not chosen, right? So what are the possible markers to help applicants determine whether or not they were discriminated during the interview stage?
Well, sometimes you might look at questions that you were asked. For example, if you find, going back to you gave an example of a person who was told that, I don't want to hire somebody who's married or who has children because of the nature of the job. So you would sometimes think about, well, what sort of questions did they ask me at this interview? Did they ask me questions about, I always like to stick a pin. I remember some time ago with the commission, we have one of our commissioners sit into interview panels. And that person, because of their human resource training, they were a bit old school human resources. They would actually try to engage the person in a bit of conversation from the earlies about who they are. And they say this is part of the warming up to get to see the person and to, so tell me something about you. Are you married? So sometimes these questions may be innocently asked, but and so that's always a sticker. That's always a bit of a controversial issue I found, because that is how that's how persons were trained before. That you need to ask the person a little bit about themselves to get them to open up. But so I think sometimes you would have to really figure out how the interview progressed. I mean, if you ask questions on the early stages about that, it may not be necessarily being discriminatory, but it's something you would have to think about. Did they focus on certain areas? I mean, let's just say they asked you, do you have any children? And you say, yes, I have two, and they didn't ask you anything further. Then it may not have been a discriminatory question. It might have just been, a question, as I said, a warming up sort of question. But so you would have to be able to say why you think the questions that were being asked of you were discriminatory. So this is something that you would have to be able to say, as opposed to they asked me this question. You would need to be able to say something more. Well, they asked me these questions. This is the conversation that we had. This was the discussion that we had.
Okay, so they should be gathering evidence to support this claim.
Yes.
All right. So as you mentioned, employees that would ask during chit chat, ask some questions like, are you married, and so on. Should they avoid these type of questions during interviews?
Ideally, yes, they should. Yes, they should. I mean, while you want to try and break the ice with somebody, you need to perhaps avoid these sorts of questions. Well, there might be certain questions that you want to ask. Let's just say you're applying for the job of a bus driver or vehicle driver. You may want to find out, there are genuine questions you may need to ask about their health. I mean, in other words, what is your vision? You can't have a person who's suffering from glaucoma, for example, as a bus driver or vehicle driver. But we always say that what you need to do is you need to focus on the requirements of the job. You can't just say, do you have any disabilities? Because I mean, that is an invasive question. And I may have, I'm just saying, I may have perhaps some sort of asthmatic condition, but that is not going to affect your ability to perform that particular job. Condition may affect your ability to do other kinds of jobs. Let's just say you have to work in in the fire services where you have to wear a gas mask, or you're working in an industrial plant in Point Lisas, for example, where those gas masks and those are realities. Then the person might be able to say, well, your asthmatic condition will be a hindrance to doing the job. But what you need to do is really, instead of engaging in general chit chat, do you have any disabilities? You need to actually speak to what are the specific questions you want to ask them. And even in a job like that, you may say that even if I select you as a candidate, will you be willing to undergo medical testing, to confirm your medical condition, about your disability, about your breathing and your vision, or as the case may be. But going back to your initial question about making small talk about are you married, do you have children? Yes, I think these are questions really you should avoid.
Thanks, Haran. And we're almost at the end of our session. It's been just about half hour. Christine last week said it doesn't feel like half hour, but
no, it does not.
Half hour did pass, but just in wrapping up, Haran, in Monday's column, in EOC's Monday's column in the Newsday, we looked at the social and business benefits of hiring a diverse workforce, right? So for many companies, this could be a competitive advantage for them. So let's say an organization wants to take that step to hire and retain a more diverse workforce. I want to break this up into two questions for you. What is a diverse workforce? What are the markers of a diverse company? And also, what advice would you give to employers to hire and retain a diverse workforce?
Okay. Well, a diverse workforce is really a workforce that has as many different types of persons as may be possible. There might be some areas where I always like to say, diversity, while it is desirable, should not necessarily be a goal in and of itself. And let me use the example. Let us say you are a school located in a certain area. You would like to have as many different teachers as you can to expose your students, your pupils, to as many different persons as you can, persons of different religions, persons of different races, persons of different backgrounds. But at the same time, because you are based in a certain area, if your catchment is that area, it may not necessarily be as easy as you would like. If it is, for example, you're hiring persons who are, just by natural attrition, persons who are closer to the area would be the persons who would hire. Now you can't specifically say I'm only hiring persons from that area. That's geographical discrimination. But what I'm speaking about is just natural attrition. If you have a manufacturing plant located, say, in Arima, by natural attrition, most of the employees will be persons who are within a certain proximity to that area, just by natural forces. So, but diversity, really the business case for it is that by having as diverse a workforce as possible, you are able to serve your clients and your customers better, because you're able to understand the different needs of different persons and the different ways that they think. And so it actually increases it's actually a good business model to look towards hiring as many different types of persons as possible. But at the same time, it is to be mentioned that our Equal Opportunity Act, unlike, say, the Equal Opportunity Act in places like Canada, which they tend to take a different model. They speak about quotas and percentages to look for an affirmative action and that sort of thing. The U.S. Supreme Court has ruled that affirmative action is discrimination. There's no such thing as reverse discrimination, to say that we want to prefer women to men because we have, because there are so many men working here, we want to actually increase our quota of women. They're saying that hiring based on quotas, whether it's a gender quota or race quota, is a discrimination, because you're basically basing your hiring practices on religion, on sex, on that sort of thing. So that while diversity is desirable, we need to be very careful that you don't necessarily say that it is not a means to it is not an end in and of itself. You know, to say it is not a, it is a goal rather, but it is not a means to a goal, meaning that you don't say, okay, we are looking specifically for a woman for this job, or we're looking specifically for a male, or specifically for a person who's Catholic or Hindu or something like that, except for the circumstances that I mentioned earlier about being, you know, employment in a religious shop, a bona fide occupational requirement, that sort of thing. But other than that, no, you should not be hiring based solely on gender or on sex or on race, that sort of thing.
Right, not hiring just for diversity's sake.
Yes, not hiring just for diversity's sake. Rather, but it is something that the company should aspire towards, but it should not be something that you say that I'm going to hire for diversity's sake.
Thank you so much, Aaron, for answering that, and also for all your responses during this session. We are at the end of our session. I want to include some emails really quickly. If you want to lodge a complaint at the EOC, you can send in an email using complaints@eoc.gov.tt. You can also go onto our website, www.equalopportunity.gov.tt, to lodge a complaint there as well. And if you want us to deliver a similar session at an organization that you work at to discuss workplace discrimination, sexual harassment, etc., you can send a request at communications@eoc.gov.tt. You can also look out on our Facebook page for more information, and check out the online news day every Monday for our columns. So thank you once again all for joining us. Thank you, Haran, very much again. Always a pleasure. And
yes, thank you for having me.
You're welcome. And we'll close off today's session. Bye, everybody. Take care and be safe.
Bye, everyone. Be safe.